SNAP has been in the news with the government shutdown and a lot of people talking about people getting access to their benefits. That's not the conversation we're going to have today. Today's conversation is a different part of SNAP, and it's going to have a retailer focus. What is going on that will affect retailers in a number of states beginning as soon as January 1st. Joining us for our conversation today is Margaret Mannion. She is Director of Government Relations at NACS, and she's been focused on all kinds of things related to SNAP. So, Margaret, thanks again for joining us. Last time you talked with us, you talked about EBT chip card, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But before we dive into what we want to talk about today, which is the food restriction waivers, for anybody who isn't aware of SNAP, do you want to just give us a big picture of what SNAP is and how it affects our industry on the most general level?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me again. It is a pleasure to be here, as always. SNAP overall is a federal nutrition program, and some of the neediest citizens in this country are a part of it, and it helps them supplement funds to buy grocery items either at a grocery store, supermarket, drugstore, convenience store. Where our industry fits in, we don't claim to be grocery stores or supermarkets. I think the average convenience store is about 11 times smaller than your average supermarket. But where we do play a huge role is in those fill-in shopping trips. So you think about in rural America, you might have like a one stoplight town where the convenience store is the only town in place, or is the only store in town where you can buy food, buy fuel. It's a community gathering place. When you think about like in urban and even suburban America, the convenience store might be the only place accessible by walking or public transportation or 24/7, 24 hours a day. So if you're working a second or third shift and you're on SNAP and you need to pick up your milk for your kids in the morning, you're able to do that overnight at a convenience store.
So just like at grocery stores may have $100 rings or something like that, convenience stores have about $8 rings. Convenience stores aren't thought of as pantry. They're thought of as you said, fill-in items. And what we want to talk about today is the food restriction waivers, and that relates to something that has been pushed by, we'll use the acronym first, MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. And a number of states have passed food restriction waivers that it's like a fancy term, restriction, waivers. It makes you think like restriction is bad, but waiver means we aren't going to get it. But there are 8 states starting on January 1st that will have new regulations about what people can buy going into stores. So there's 8 stores involved, and then there's others coming after that. It's fairly confusing. So set that up, and I have a whole bunch of questions about the confusion related to that.
Yeah, you are not alone. I think everyone is very confused and eagerly awaiting to see what January 1st will bring. For as long as the SNAP program has been around, there have been efforts to restrict what customers can buy with their SNAP dollars. This is the first time, though, in our country's history, in the program history, where USDA, the Department of Agriculture, that oversees the SNAP program, is allowing states to restrict the purchase of certain items. So what you're seeing a lot in these waiver states so far, there's 12 total right now that have had waivers approved by USDA. Most of them are restricting products like soda, soft drinks, candy. Florida's a little bit more complicated. They throw processed, prepackaged desserts in there as well too. But as you're saying, this is very confusing. And unfortunately, every state has a different definition for each of these terms.
So I don't want to bury the lead. There's a bunch of different groups. It's not like NACS is the only one that's saying, well, hey, maybe this isn't a good idea, or let's think about this, etc. There's this one group called the Food Research and Action Council Center, and they've been involved over the years. We've been to their conferences, etc. But their goal is to improve the nutrition, health, and well-being of people struggling against poverty-related hunger in the United States through advocacy partnerships, etc. So they have a statement about these restriction waivers, and they say it is a misguided move that undermines the program's core mission of reducing hunger and supporting health and food dignity for the 42 million people who rely on the program every day. So that's what FRAC says. But the complications at retail is we have 8 states that have this going into effect on January 1st. And I even have the cheat sheet here. If you're not aware, that 8 states, it is Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, but that may get moved, but it may not, Utah, and West Virginia. And then we have Louisiana coming 2 weeks after that on the 15th, and some others happening this year, because you said 12 altogether. So this involves a lot of different things that have to happen in stores, because POS has to be changed. There's also differences in terminology, and I saw a presentation by you where you talked about the different language. It's not just that, let's just say these 8 states take effect on January 1st. Some of them say you can't buy soda. Some say you can't buy carbonated beverages. Some say you can't buy sweetened beverages. Some say you can't buy energy drinks. Some say you can't buy unhealthy drinks, whatever that means.
Yeah, no. And nobody does know what that means also, by the way.
Okay, good. And then I thought I heard something like in some of these things, whether it's beverages or whether it's snacks, something about a restriction if the first or second ingredient is sugar, which means, and it's not necessarily part of how things come into the store that says, here's the ingredients. You literally have to go on your store shelf and look, where is sugar on this?
Exactly.
And that's not the easiest task in the world.
Yeah. And the thing that you see with a lot of the early on adopters of these waivers, a lot of the states were choosing definitions based on something called a streamlined sales tax definition. And that's what, individual states, cities, towns, municipalities use to tax foods like soda and candy. The thing to note, though, about this definition is that it was written for tax purposes. It was not written for federal nutrition policy, and it has all these really weird caveats to it. So, for example, Idaho, one of the early adopters, they have a waiver that will restrict soda and candy, but under the candy definition, you can still sell products that are considered a candy if they have flour in them. The flour exception is what people have been calling it. So think like Sour Patch Kids, those would be restricted, like a Reese's would be restricted, but a Twix bar or a Kit Kat bar, you would still be able to purchase because under that definition, it's not technically considered candy. And so think about not just in Idaho, but 12 other states where our industry is predominantly single store operators. 60% of our industry are run by a single store operator. And so the person who's trying to figure this out and say, where does this fall on the exception list? What definition do I need to be following? It's going to be extremely challenging for our industry to implement. And we've already seen this over the past couple of months as folks are working up towards this. And it doesn't look like it's going to get any easier as well.
And it's not just our industry. If you're going to a grocery store any time between now and January 1st, my prediction is it's going to be crowded. There's Thanksgiving, there's Christmas, there's holiday with work, with people going to stores and having holiday parties, etc. Not in the stores, but buy stuff. But there's all kinds of busy. It's the busiest 2 months of the year for the grocery industry.
Correct.
And the grocery industry plays a big role in SNAP. Convenience stores are about a little bit more than half of the stores involved in the program, but much smaller percentage of sales because, as you said in the start, it's fill-in items. But there's all these different confusing definitions and if you're a small operator, you have to do an awful lot of research really quickly. If you're a larger operator and go multi-state, you got to figure out what
12
you have to
different compliance systems.
Yes.
It's the disaster, frankly. And I think that we at NACS, and we've been working really closely with the grocers on this, we have been pushing for standardized definitions across state lines so that a soda is the same thing in every state that has a waiver. Candy is the same thing if that's something that a state wants to restrict. But unfortunately, USDA is kind of ceding all power to the states here and saying that this is a quote-unquote states' rights issue. And unfortunately, what that means is a lot of the states we're so close to January 1, they don't feel like changing their definitions because we've made it this far. And unfortunately, the standard definitions doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon.
So from a retail perspective, this is going to be like the worst January 1st since Y2K. Like worrying about all these things that have to happen. It's like,
Right.
that's going to be like, well, will everything shut down? This is going to be like, how do I manage
Yeah.
my point of sale? How do I redeem SNAP? And how do I handle a customer that is not aware of these regulations
Correct.
and thinks that I'm the reason for their problem today?
Right.
And
Right.
that's also another concern because
It is.
there's a lot of heightened emotions in this country, and that just adds to things.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that we've been really pushing USDA and the state agencies on is customer education, because our number one concern is for the well-being and safety of store employees at the checkout. And if you're somebody who's been on SNAP for a couple of months, a couple of years, you've never had any restrictions at all in the program other than products like hot foods, tobacco, and alcohol. Now, all of a sudden, in Idaho, I can't buy my Sour Patch Kid watermelon candy that I'm obsessed with, but I can buy a Kit Kat bar or a Twix bar. Like, try explaining that to the customer and getting them to understand the rationale behind it. The other thing, too, that we've really been pushing states, and it sounds like USDA is also telling states this, is for the state agencies that run the SNAP program and states with waivers. They're encouraging those states to create signage for retailers to put into their stores that say this is not XYZ convenience store's decision to restrict purchases. This is a state decision. If you have questions, contact the local agency at this number. So West Virginia is a great example. I think they have come out with like 3 or 4 different types of signs on this. So we're hoping to see some other states do the same thing.
Yeah, and couldn't be a worse time because, as I said, there's a lot of emotions in this country already, but people who have been on SNAP have heightened emotions because there were concerns about how and when and if they would get SNAP benefits, and they have those same concerns going forward because there's not necessarily clarity there.
Yeah.
So let's just say I'm a 2-store operator in Indiana, and that's one of the 8 states that has the January 1st deadline. What do I need to be doing now? Who do I need to be talking to? Or is somebody going to be talking to me?
That's a great question. The state of Indiana specifically, it sounds like they have had a lot of webinars that have been hosted by the state agency, but I think that folks are still like scratching their heads on how to exactly implement this, because Indiana, I'll give them their due credit, they took out that flour exception, so we won't have to be explaining the Kit Kat scenario in Indiana, but retailers are going to have to be looking at the products on shelves. They're going to have to be looking at their price books. They're going to have to be looking at each individual SKU, UPC product codes, all of that, and looking on the next screen at the definition for these products. And you have to make the determination as the retailer what is in and what is out. And it's interesting to see how other states have approached this. The state of Oklahoma actually yesterday just put out their own UPC like product code list of restricted items. It's about like 18,000 different products. They're one of the only states that have come up with an actual product list. Most of the other states have ceded all power to the retailers and are leaving it up to them to figure out what's in and what's out.
So at first I thought you were going to say they've listed 18 products. And
No.
then you said 18,000.
18,000.
So you don't want to hit print when you see that PDF because
Yes.
you're going to need more ink.
That's
And
exactly right.
that's something where you're going to have to that's pretty time consuming.
Well, think about that's just 18,000 products in Oklahoma. The talking point that FRAC has shared that we use constantly with the SNAP coalition that we have here in DC, there's 650,000 products, food and beverage products on the market today. And that doesn't include the thousands that are entering the market or leaving the market or recipes are being changed. It is a massive, massive undertaking. And I don't think that enough people are aware of the amount of work that it's going to take to implement.
So I won't focus on Indiana. I'll pick a different state, Florida. So here we are January 1st. if I'm a retailer in Florida, does my POS automatically say, well, in Florida, it is soda, energy drinks, candy, and prepared desserts?
No.
Did I get that right? Oh,
Yes,
it's changed.
that's correct. That's correct. But no, your POS will not tell you that. Retailers will have to program that into their POS.
And is there a concern that I do my best, but I don't get it right?
Yeah.
That I will not get paid for that SNAP transaction and I will risk losing that sale?
That's a great question. From what I understand, it doesn't sound like it, but I will say we need a lot more guidance and information from USDA on the enforcement piece, because right now there's nothing. No one knows what this is going to look like. Each individual state has a different way that they're going to say that they're monitoring compliance. So some have like secret shopper programs, some will have like quote unquote state agency inspectors go in, but no one knows what happens if you're found to be selling these restricted items to somebody on SNAP. And I think with the shutdown, USDA, it sounded like they were working on guidance on what enforcement is going to look like. But the shutdown was 40-something days. We're just picking back up again, and we're not really sure when we're going to get that guidance.
So it probably best guidance is do your best.
Do your best.
Make the best.
Yes.
Find whatever resources are appropriate. Do your best, and hopefully that is enough to get through the initial confusion as this rolls out, and more states, because we know that other states will be behind this, and we don't know what the rest of 2026 will look like.
Yeah, there are reports that something like 30 states have requested waivers, which is alarming to us. I'm looking at a map right now of states that I know have submitted waivers and they just haven't been approved by USDA. There's also states that are considering submitting waivers because of this policy change that happened over the summer with the One Big Beautiful Bill, the reconciliation package that got passed into law. There was a rural health development program that Center for Medicaid Services is going to send out dollars to any state on rural health to help with rural health. And you get more money if you have a waiver in place or a waiver requested or waiver legislation working its way through the state government. So I think we're going to see more and more states do waivers next year as well.
So speaking of more and more, I said in the beginning, I wanted to cover a couple other topics on SNAP.
Yeah.
Just cover them quickly. But EBT chip card. Last time we talked, it was, I believe, Oklahoma and was it Utah? California.
Yep.
Have requirements that the new EBT cards have a chip in them because the feeling was that was more secure.
Yeah.
However, that creates some issues in how do you have the proper terminals and acceptance and things like that, and more is coming from what I understand.
Yes. So it's this funny thing that happens. These state governments, they have all their best intentions lined up. California is the only state that has implemented chip cards as of today. They started rolling it out at the beginning of this year to thousands of residents across the state, and it sounds like it went pretty well. I think retailers were prepared in the state because the state did a great job of getting out, going into stores, foot traffic, alerting people of this change. Oklahoma, they were targeting summer of this year. It's November 20th of this year, and Oklahoma still has not pushed through or sent out their chip cards yet, but I actually do have a list of some other states that are interested in doing chip cards, and it sounds like it'll be a 2026 thing. So I think Maryland is looking at May or June 2026, Massachusetts and Michigan, Oregon, also looking summertime 2026. So you're seeing here not only SNAP restriction waivers, but also EBT chip card implementation. That's going to be a challenge for retailers to figure out. So
a lot of states involved in all these challenges. Let's end on two things related to SNAP that you're working on that are potentially positives. One is related to stocking requirements, and I know there's The NACS team has asked retailers to submit comments
Yeah.
on these stocking requirements because they could or will change. And we want our industry's message to be heard on how easy it is to stay in the program and how onerous it would be if a lot of stores drop out of the program and what that would mean to people that are seeking to use their SNAP cards. So that's one thing that is in progress, right? Is there any update on that and how that might play out?
Yeah, I think by the time that this comes out, the comment deadline will have passed. Comments on that proposed rule are due November 24th, which is the Monday of Thanksgiving week. But essentially what this rule would do is increase our stocking requirements to be SNAP eligible retailers. So right now, you as a convenience retailer have to stock 3 varieties of food in the 4 staple food categories. This would put into place something that got passed all the way back in 2014 with the 2014 Farm Bill. It would bump that number up to 7 varieties of food in the 4 staple food categories. Our concern with the proposed rule is that there are added flexibilities for retailers to meet 7 in the fruits and vegetables category and in the protein category. It used to be called the meats, poultry, fish category. They've shortened it very nicely. Unfortunately, in the grains category and the dairy category, there are some challenges that retailers are going to face if the rule is finalized as written. And I think that the comment period will have passed. We're going to work with USDA to hopefully get the final rule, whenever it is put out, to a good workable place, especially with those changes in the greens category and the dairy category, so that we can wholeheartedly support the final rule and help our industry implement these new stocking requirements.
So one final thing on SNAP, hot foods. That is something that we have seen waivers, and these are the good kind of waivers where when there's, say, a hurricane, wildfire, something like that, people don't necessarily have access to food that they're able to cook, but they don't have access to kitchens to cook in. So having the ability to get hot food is really important. But there's also some movement in how hot foods can be part of SNAP beyond emergencies, and that's also something you're working on.
Yeah. This is like my passion project. The waivers are keeping me up at night. The stocking requirements are keeping me up at night. But all throughout, we are working hard to allow SNAP customers to be able to buy hot foods. The interesting thing is these waivers, some states have actually requested the inclusion of rotisserie chicken. So if you look at Arkansas, they were, I think, one of the very first to request a waiver earlier this year. They asked to allow the sale to SNAP customers hot rotisserie chickens. Unfortunately, USDA for all of those hot food inclusion requests has not approved any of those, so it doesn't sound like they're going to approve any of those, but we're still working on legislation that will hopefully get passed as part of the Farm Bill that would permanently allow the sale of all hot foods to folks on SNAP, because frankly, it just doesn't make sense. You can walk into one of our stores and buy a cold sandwich, but if it's put in a panini press, it is no longer eligible for SNAP, and you're not changing the nutrition quality, you're not changing the price. It's literally, you're just heating it up. And I think a lot of people realize that this makes common sense, and I think it's common sense policy that more folks should be supportive.
Well, as I mentioned, SNAP has been in the news a lot over the last 2 months. Thank you, Margaret. That's a pretty good rundown of where we fit in with SNAP and all the things that are going on, and how much NACS depends on our members' voice to communicate on all these issues. And that always helps Margaret and others in the GR team tell stories to Congress and make sure that we have legislation that reflects what really makes sense out there. So thank you for everything that you're doing on SNAP and everything else, Margaret. And let's talk again soon about something besides SNAP.
Great. Thanks. And happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you. And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.